Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump says he will soon make a final determination. Welcome to the Friday edition, as the president hunkers down in the Situation Room today to presumably make a call on a deal with Iran. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, if you listen to the White House today, we could be on the verge of a breakthrough.
Well, possibly, if that is the determination he makes.
That's right.
He does have some criteria he wants to make sure Iran is meeting, including the immediate opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the removal of mines in the strait, and the destruction of the nuclear dust, the enriched uranium still in Iran. And we haven't heard from Iran as to whether or not they're willing to agree to all three of those things.
Those are the three red lines, as the White House has put it before. If you look at the president's post from a short time ago, however, he says definitively, ships caught in the strait due to our amazing and unprecedented naval blockade, which will now be lifted, may start the process of heading home, as if there's a deal struck already.
So maybe the determination has been made, and he's just keeping us all in suspense. It's unclear. We should note the president doesn't have any public events on his agenda today, so we may only hear from him on Truce Social.
Yep, absolutely. Saying in this post that I will be meeting now in the Situation Room to make a final determination. But Kailey, we don't know who he's meeting with.
No, we don't. So there's a lot of unanswered questions as to what this means for the conflict and its potential resolution, and what it ultimately will mean for the markets and the economy. Some important conversations in that regard coming up this hour. We'll speak about the prospect of a diplomatic breakthrough with Jane Harman, but also the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey will be joining Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders for a conversation you don't want to miss, as of course the UK and Europe perhaps feeling the energy shock emanating from the Middle East even more acutely than the United States.
Before and stronger as we get ready for buffers to begin to disappear and actual physical shortages to arrive. The markets are really hoping for some good news today, and in some cases already pricing it in.
Yeah, in fact, oil prices are going lower today. So let's get a check on those and everything else as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe and Kailey. Three key bits of information. We got the VIX lower, we've got oil lower, and stocks are higher, not just higher, but records right to the numbers, with the S&P now at 75.86. Higher now by 22 points, another 22, up by about 0.3%. S&P, by the way, on track for its 9th straight week of gains. Dow Industrials up 329 on the Dow, a gain now of 0.6%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is up 81 for NASDAQ, up 0.3%. A retreat, though, for the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares, down 0.6%. The SOX higher, little changed, up under 0.2%, but again, the VIX holding just above 15. The 10-year at 4.43%, the 2-year 3.99%, and the 30-year 4.97%. Gold up $72 the ounce to $45.67 for spot gold. That is a gain of 1.6%. West Texas Intermediate crude 86.78 a barrel on WTI, slumping now by 2.3%. Brent 91.91 a barrel of Brent, the global benchmark, down right now by 1.9%. Shares of American space-related stocks, including Voyager and Rocket Lab, are all lower after Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket exploded last night in a massive fireball while undergoing a test on a Florida launch pad last night. Carmen Holdings is plunging 11.2%. Shares of AST Space Mobile, they are down now by 13.7%. Rocket Lab down 3.7%. Voyager Technologies trading lower by 5.5%. Recapping, S&P 500 index at a record, up 23, up by about 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. Checking out the trading on this Friday, which of course is far from over, and we expect that Friday may not close out before we hear from President Trump on what his decision is regarding the way forward with Iran. As he says, he was gathering with unknown people in the Situation Room today to make a determination as to whether or not a deal can be made, a deal which he outlined should have multiple conditions. The first being, as he led his post on Truce Social with, Iran must agree they will never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. Add to that list the Strait of Hormuz being open, mines being removed, and the enriched uranium still in Iranian territory being dug up, he says, and destroyed.
We'll add another quote, and this comes from Iran. The Speaker of Iran's parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, quote, "We have no trust in guarantees or words. The only criterion is action. No action will be taken before the other side acts," unquote. So the ultimate game of chicken continues. And we're joined now on Bloomberg by Jane Harman, the former Congresswoman from California, Democratic Congresswoman, former ranking member, the House Intel Committee, and author of Insanity Defense: Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. Jane, it's always great to have you. Is there anything different today? I know the market is keying off these headlines every day and hoping for the best. When you hear a post like this or read a post like this from President Trump, does it make you optimistic for a breakthrough?
No. I think we've been hearing things like this over the long period since this war of choice commenced in late February, and I don't think anything much is new. I think to use the metaphor that President Trump uses, Iran has a lot of cards, and so does Israel. And both of them have to be in a place where it's to their advantage to end this, or at least slow this down. It's to our advantage to do that. But I don't really think to theirs at this point. I also don't think we have any really good military options, because if we now bomb the energy facilities of Iran, which would be the next logical target, they're going to attack the energy facilities of the entire region, and that will probably shut down even more oil and other resources from reaching the world, and make the markets even more closed. So when you're in a hole, stop digging. I am for some way to work this out. I was not for this war, and nor was anybody else that I really know of, other than the administration or maybe just the president. But I would like this to have a happy ending, but I don't see it yet.
Well, and as you talk about the idea that if the U.S. were to pursue a military option, that it would spur Iranian retaliation, are we to believe, Jane, that Iran still does have the capacity to conduct such operations when we continually hear from the administration how most of their military apparatus has been destroyed?
I know. They don't have a navy. They don't have missiles, et cetera. And that is true, that we have degraded their capacity. But they do have drones, and they're manufacturing more drones right now. And we've learned that modern warfare can be enormously effective using these small autonomous vehicles. And Ukraine has taught us that. So they're still in the game. Plus, the regime has not been replaced. Their third level, as Trump calls it, is very hard line and playing this game of cards pretty well.
Interestingly, today, Pakistan is in town, Jane. Of course, an important mediator here in negotiations, and the president has been speaking very affectionately toward Pakistan and the role that it's played in this entire saga. The foreign minister in Washington to meet with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, across town. Israeli and Lebanese officials in D.C. today for talks on their ceasefire. Could we look back on these meetings as an important inflection point?
I would like to look back at them or forward to them as an important inflection point. But again, I don't see it. Israel has shown no real signs of backing down from this massive bombing and clearing space in southern Lebanon. And it's to Israel's advantage, or Bibi Netanyahu's advantage, to keep this war, that particular war, going. There's no real progress in Gaza that I can see. Again, these are ceasefires, but they don't really cease. Same thing in the Strait of Hormuz. I would point out that it's reported that Pakistan was asked to join the Abraham Accord. This is another thing in play. And it really was a good initiative of the Trump administration. But Pakistan apparently has turned that down. And let's also understand that Pakistan has nukes. So this is very complex. Something I would suggest is that we get some very technically experienced negotiators in the room, which I don't see. And I just point out one more thing. It's not just that the JCPOA, the Iran nuke deal from 2015, was negotiated by experienced people over 2 years, but it's also that it was called the JCPOA, joint. The five countries, the P5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany were all partners to this deal. That would make another deal, if we ever make one, much more effective to bring back partners and allies. I know that's not a popular thing to say in this administration, but it was a mistake to me to push allies and partners away.
Jane, I want to go back to the point you were making on an expansion of the Abraham Accords, because as you were outlining, the conduct Israel is still engaged in obviously is a very steep hurdle for some Gulf countries who want a two-state solution before they're willing to sign on to the Accords. I noticed in the Truce social post the president put out today, despite earlier this week suggesting an expansion of the Abraham Accords would need to be part of any deal. He wasn't sure a deal would be worth it if that was not included. He didn't make mention of it today, and I wonder if we should read into that.
Well, let's see what he says tomorrow. But I actually think that's a very good idea to expand the Abraham Accord. Unfortunately, this president doesn't take yes for an answer. Let's just kind of look at it. The JCPOA could have been mended, not ended, and be a stronger deal now for which he could take credit. The Abraham Accord, which only has 2 signatories to my knowledge, could be much bigger if he had not offended all of our partners and allies in the region. And the 12-day bombing with Israel of Iran last year achieved some real results, and that should have led immediately to, I think, very aggressive negotiations with an experienced negotiating team, and we'd be much farther along than we are now.
Jane, there's an expectation that the next time a war powers resolution hits the floor of the House, it's going to pass. The Speaker, in fact, pulled the last one before recess because it looked like it was on the march to actually have the votes to pass. There are questions about what will happen if indeed there are the votes for a war powers vote, an authorization for the use of military force, depending on what form this takes, whether the White House, in fact, will abide by this or set up a grand debate before the Supreme Court. What do you think?
Well, I applaud Congress. You know, my acronym now, Joe, is CACO. Congress always chickens out. If they actually do this, I mean, some Republicans are now defecting, but it's not just invoking the War Powers Act. It's then what will Congress do to put guardrails around this war, including ending it? What will Congress do about this metastasizing budget for this war? And you're right. Will Trump abide by anything Congress says or buck this up to the Supreme Court? There is some claim that the War Powers Act is not constitutional. Let's see. But, you know, to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of our country, which has had 3 robust branches of government with Congress basically inactive, the president very active, and the Supreme Court apparently quite partisan, is a real disappointment when you think about what the founding fathers would have dreamed for us.
All right, we will leave it on that note. Former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman of California, of course, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee and also author of Insanity Defense, Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. And certainly this is a big national security challenge, Joe, and the difficulty the United States finds itself in, as Jeanne was speaking to, is if you choose not to take a deal and escalate further militarily, what you could see as a result is Iranian strikes against energy infrastructure in the Gulf, exacerbating what is already becoming an increasingly challenging supply situation in global oil markets as inventories are drawn down.
And that's been the threat from Iran, to retaliate against U.S. interest or even allied interests throughout the Middle East or beyond. This could be a global retaliation if Iran were to make good on its threats. So this is a very delicate moment that we're in.
Certainly so. And of course, if you were to see further shortages in the energy market and prices driven higher, it could have even greater effects on the global economy and on inflation than are already being experienced, not just here in the U.S., but elsewhere as well, including, for example, Europe and the UK. And it's actually on that note that we turn now to the Reykjavík Economic Forum that is happening in Iceland right now, where Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders is on the ground. And she's joined now for an important conversation here on Bloomberg TV and radio with the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey. Stephanie, take it away.
Kailey, thank you, and thank you, Governor, for joining us. At this conference, we did have an opportunity to hear from you and talk to you about monetary policy this morning, but there's also been a lot of conversation about AI and the potential impact on the economy of AI, but also the cybersecurity risks associated with new AI tools. And of course, most recently, the one we've been hearing about, worrying about, is Mythos. Can I just confirm, have UK banks got access to Mythos now? Are they getting it on that trial basis?
So they don't have access to Mythos at the moment, and that's an issue that is very important. And by the way, this is a very important development. But there are other models out there. I mean, Mythos isn't the only model out there. There's obviously something of a race going along to move the technology on. And I'm very optimistic that they either just have or are about to get, the major UK banks have access to other models which will get them substantially.
But just going back to the Mythos, sorry, because we had a story, in fact, I think the Anthropic's UK and Northern Europe head, the company that obviously makes Mythos, they told Bloomberg last month that it would be within a week that UK bank chiefs were going to be able to be part of that, the Glasswing project. So do you know what happened?
Well, there was so there has been a Glasswing Phase 2 being talked about really for the last 6 weeks or so, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think this has been somewhat caught up in the process with the US administration.
So, sorry, just reading between the lines, it sounds like Anthropic had certainly told us on Bloomberg Television that it was going to be just a matter of days or a week or so, and it's the US administration that has potentially.
Well, we're not party to that process. I think, to be fair to Anthropic, I think they have been working very hard. They want access to critical parties, and it's very important. They're still, I think, actively seeking that. Quite why the process is a bit different from one company to another, I'm afraid I can't explain to you. Obviously, from our point of view, given our concern about the risks involved in this, it's very important that there is access. And what I really want to see is evolve a process very quickly where we can have a sort of controlled but fast process to assess these models. And frankly, as to what my head of IT at the Bank of England told me is a ton of patching that then has to follow very quickly to fix the things that these models are finding.
And I guess, as part of this conversation, I guess we also think about, one of the conversations I have when I get nervous is when they also talk about the open source, the companies that are a bit behind, the way they get users is to have open source, which means if you discover that the so-called bad guys are using that technology to rob banks or whatever it is, you're then not able to turn it off in the way you can with the others.
Well, look, I'm not speaking as an expert in this subject. I
You're
honestly
having to be an expert.
We try to learn quickly. Yeah. I think two things that I've taken from the many discussions we've had. One is that I think if you have kept your cyber defences up and better prepared, you will go into this process in a better place than if you haven't. And we've worked very hard with UK banks over many years. And we'll go on doing so. Secondly, I think you're right on the open source point. Now, I think what Anthropic are certainly saying is, look, open source is more of a vulnerability than closed, and that's certainly a conclusion they've drawn from all the work they've done. Now, I mean, the two things I think, however, follow. One is there's a lot of open source out there. Two, again, I'm not an expert in this field. There's a lot of almost theological, doctrine about open source and not open source, which this is somewhat pushing against. So
yeah, I think because we've tended to say there's been a sort of inclination towards open source, but in this case, it feels like it's more.
It's being questioned.
I mean, does it highlight sort of overall the risks of? I mean, going back to the Anthropic thing of having US-owned companies being absolutely dominant in this space, and actually UK banks, you being in the position of kind of begging to the Americans to get access to this?
Well, look, I don't take a particular position on where the sort of, in a sense, the companies are based that are developing these things, because this is a very, very big development, and it's actually very important, and there are many good things that will come out of this. What I would say is that the spillovers from this sort of from cyber risk are so big that we can't just have a single sort of national approach towards dealing with the consequences and mitigating it. There's got to be an international approach to this. It's got to be in a sensible, sort of firmly based international process, because I think anybody who thought, well, I've dealt with my banks, that's okay, I'm afraid that won't work, because they're all so heavily interconnected. We've got big payment systems, big messaging systems. So that approach won't work.
Now, as chairman of the Financial Stability Board, you're obviously involved in lots of discussions around sort of global efforts on financial stability and looking for risks. And one area, again, where people are looking nervously at the US in particular is the run-up of private credit.
Yeah.
And whether there should be more of a sort of a tougher approach to at least having more reporting requirements or other things on private credit. You've highlighted that a lot of traditional banks and institutions are now very much intertwined with private credit. Is that, I mean, are you getting a hearing on that from the US in terms of the risks of that?
Excuse me, yes. I think, look, first of all, private credit is playing an important role. I think it's a good thing. Let's come back to AI for a moment. We've got a very big investment demand going on for it to support the innovation in AI and in the tech sector more broadly, and private credit is an important part of meeting that demand, and that's a good thing. What I think we have to look very carefully at is the word private can be misleading in some ways because it is not an island on its own. It is connected into the system, into the broader system. A lot of the underpinning liquidity will come from the banking system. It is connected into the banking system. That's not bad. That's inevitable. So it's very important that we understand those interconnections, how they work. Are there points of sort of fragility in there? That's why at the Bank of England we're doing a second system-wide exploratory scenario to follow on the one we did on hedge fund activity and major government bond markets a couple of years ago. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think is important is, and I think this is particularly true with the spread into sort of so-called retail investment, is do the investors understand the assets they've got and the characteristics of those assets? Because there are clearly, there are some signs of strains in the market. I think they're often described as idiosyncratic. Okay, every incident will have a different story attached to it. But we are seeing some increase in requests, quite a big increase in requests for outflows to take liquidity out. And I think how that plays out will depend on what investors think thought they had relative to what they sort of now think they've got.
Just to run through in another area where you've got quite a big distinction now between the UK and the US, or at least there has been in the proposals you had put forward, was for stable coins and the basic approach you'd had towards them. Are you now scrapping the idea of capping the amount of stable coin that individuals and businesses can hold?
Well, we've looked again at that for the UK, and we'll be coming out with our proposals shortly, before the summer.
So it's still, because it was supposed to be in June.
Yeah,
I'm
expecting, before the sort of summer holiday season takes off for us, we'll get that out. If you don't mind,
are you looking at looking at total issuance sort of limits instead of?
That would certainly be an option. Let's see where we get to. I think the other thing that I would emphasise with stable coins is to put the global hat back on again, is that we are going to have sort of what I call sort of rules of the game, as it were, for the use of stable coins cross-border. And we are going to be approaching the point when we really do need to sort of get seriously to work on that side of things, because that's going to be important. Because again, what I always say, what we want to get the benefit of is digital technology and all the benefits that will bring with it in the payment system. Now, you can do that in all sorts of ways. You can do it through central bank digital currency, you can do it through tokenized deposits, do it through stable coins. I don't think we should be in any sense sort of biased in our approach to that. But there are going to have to be sort of rules of the road, as it were.
But you've been saying something similar to that in various ways, for a while.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem like there's any appetite on the other side of the Atlantic to have rules of the road or really very many limits on this part of the market at all. They see it as a big competitive advantage for the US.
Yes, but I think the rest of the world is going to take a different view on that.
And on the central bank digital currency, again, the US has now gone out of its way to ban, in the Genius Act, to ban the US, the Federal Reserve, from producing a digital dollar.
A retail, yes.
Will there ever be a Bank of England, will be a digital pound?
Well, we're continuing to work on it, and it's very important we do, because it helps us to understand the underlying technology. For me, I know I'm probably at the sort of noted sceptical end on this distribution. I think for me the question is this: do we need to create a new form of central bank money to satisfy this need to have digital technology in the payment system? And look, this is a point we've discussed with the UK banks. Said, look, most of the stock of money is in your accounts. If you think about commercial bank money, they've got most of the money. There's a stock of it in the central bank. So I would say the natural starting point here is to explore the tokenized deposits. That is what is going on, both domestically and internationally. UK banks are looking at it because we got ahead in the UK 20 years ago with faster payments. Technology's moved on. We've got to move on. And then internationally, you may have seen the other day, there was news of a test of the so-called Project Agora, which the BIS are running, which we're involved in, which I think is a very good thing, because that gets to the other big issue, which is how can we improve cross-border payments? Because I'm afraid I always describe that as somewhat of the land that time forgot.
I'm pushing you because there's one last question.
Yeah,
we've had some, quite a lot of the central bankers here have been sort of somewhat bragging about the number of AI tools they have on their own computers and how they're using it. We're obviously using AI. Our economist team are using AI on what the Bank of England says, and we're judging whether or not it's direction of travel. How are you using it internally?
We do. So we're growing in our use of it. We use it obviously for data. We use it for coding, speeding things up. But we do use it in the MPC. We've experimented with our staff have with modelling, and also we do start to use it to use things like language models to say, well, if you write the MPC minutes like this, how might it be received?
So this is terrible. So we're now going to have a sort of spiral because we are using it. We have
we
the
know
Bank
you're
of England
using it.
speak. We have developed our own. The economists have developed their own.
We've noted that.
Right.
Yes.
So we've done ours. You've done yours. The whole thing is going into an AI
our model
spiral.
can play against your model.
All right.
Well, that's the way of the world. That's the way of the world. But it's helpful to us because it does occasionally throw things up, and it says, look, if you do this, this is words. This is not about voting or anything. This is about words. This is how it will be received.
Yeah, Governor Bailey,
is that
fascinating.
What you want?
All right,
really
thank
good
you.
To you,
Thank you very much. Back to you, Kailey.
All right, Stephanie Flanders, live in Iceland with the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey. Great conversation heard here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And Joe, fascinating to hear them talking about how central bankers are thinking about AI and the way in which AI is not only going to change how they do their work, but also the very nature of the problems economically that they will end up having to address.
It's kind of amazing the tentacles this story has, whether you're talking about politics or the economy. You can't avoid this element. And here in Washington, it's an obsession right now as we reach for AI regulations that have still not materialized. We've got a lot ahead coming up with our political panel today. Kailey, the President of the United States is in the Situation Room right now. Yeah,
he says he will be making a determination on a deal with Iran. Of course, Iran probably has a determination to make of its own. That's and Iranian state media right now, quoting or citing the foreign ministry, is saying that no final understanding has been reached. So once again, it's a little bit of a he said, she said conversation.
Right. And pulling back a bit from our highs, not a lot, but a bit from our highs earlier. We want to check in with Charlie.
Yeah, let's
Charlie Pellet has the latest on the markets right now in New York before we assemble our political panel. How's it going, sir?
Right. We are holding on to gains, Joe and Kailey. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing as we continue to monitor developments out of the Middle East. And of course, the White House will update you immediately on any developments. But let's get right to the equity markets. We are looking at a gain of 17 points right now at a record 75.81 on the S&P. Ceasefire deals hopes are sending stocks higher. The VIX, by the way, just above 15. Oil is falling. The Dow up 344 now, up 0.7%. NASDAQ is up 50. That is a gain of 0.2%. 10-year at 4.43%, with the 2-year 3.99%, and the 30-year holding below 5%, 4.997 right now on the 30-year. We do have spot gold up $68 the ounce to $45.64, up 1.5%. Crude continues to slump. WTI down almost 2%, 87.21 a barrel. Brent crude 91.93, down now by 1.9%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet checking on the markets for us. Thank you so much. As we wrap up the week here in Washington, and the week will start anew next week with Congress back in session after their extended Memorial Day recess, with a lot of issues they will have to face immediately within the House of Representatives in particular. Joe, they're going to have to put on the floor the War Powers Resolution that leadership made the decision to pull before the recess out of concern because of Republican absences, that it actually might pass.
There is an expectation that it will pass. There are Democratic and Republican members saying as much, and I think our political panel feels the same way. Let's assemble the panel right now. We've got a good one for you. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeanne Zaino, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, joined by Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, the president CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Sarah, you've talked to us a little bit earlier about this, and you see war powers passing. The question is, what happens then? The president's not going to sign that, right?
Probably not, but I think it will get through the House. I don't think there's any question at this point. Massey has no reason to ever vote with the Republicans again. And Tom Kaine, as we know in New Jersey, is missing. So I think that's a problem.
It's as good as done in your
I think
eyes.
it's as good as done, and I think that's one of the reasons why they're not bringing them back now until Wednesday. They're still trying to whip votes over the phone.
Put things off as much as possible. But of course, a War Powers Resolution in and of itself isn't going to be able to address the gas price problem, which I would imagine is why many of these members who didn't previously support it are considering it now. Jeanne, ultimately, so long as gas prices remain high, what's a lawmaker to do?
It puts them in a tough position. You know, you look like representatives right down the road from me, Mike Lawler, running in a purple district, a swing district. He's got a challenge, which is that you have gas prices so high and people are not supportive of this war. We've seen it in the polling. They may be supportive of President Trump, but they feel like the administration and Republicans in Congress in particular haven't done what they promised to do, which is to make their lives better. And we're seeing that with gas. We're seeing it with grocery prices. So the longer this war goes on, the worse it gets in the polls and the more expensive our lives get. And all of that creates trouble for Republicans. And, you know, that's why I think we will see this War Powers Act pass. And I think what the administration will do is either take Lindsey Graham's advice and ignore it, or they will fight it in the Supreme Court is the most likely thing. We've already heard Rubio and Vance talk about the law itself as ridiculous, unconstitutional, and I think they're going to fight that in court.
Well, you did it again, Jeanne. Mike Lawler, in fact, was with us just about 24 hours ago on Balance of Power. Kailey asked him about the president's remark that he didn't care about the midterms. This came out of the cabinet meeting the other day, and it seemed to echo with his comment that he wasn't concerned with Americans' personal finances, specifically when it came to inspiration for ending the war with Iran. Lawler actually had an event with President Trump about the issue of affordability in New York State just a couple of days before we talked to him. Here's what he said.
I am not concerned about the politics of a righteous decision. It is a righteous decision to ensure that Iran does not possess a nuclear weapon. As chair of the Middle East and North Africa subcommittee, my primary responsibility is to do the job that I was elected to do. And so I will continue to make sure that the decisions that are being made in Washington are to the long-term benefit of the American people, both economically and from a national security perspective. That's what the president is talking about.
Sarah, how many members is he speaking for? This is a really delicate line. Your members have been home. They're hearing from voters right now. This is either a righteous mission that must be completed or we need to get out to get gas prices lower.
Well, so Mike is a member of the Republican Main Street Partnership, as you all know. A lot of the members, they're talking about that back home. Like, we need peace in the Middle East. There hasn't been in any of our lifetime. If we can really get it here, it's a huge step forward. And obviously, we do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. The problem that is happening, though, is that's not really been explained well to the American people. Like, short-term pain, long-term gain. I mean, could you seriously, peace in the Middle East would really be shocking. So that's what our members, and that's what Mike was trying to say there, and that's what our members are talking about back home.
Well, so if it is ultimately about what he described as a righteous aim, but you still have Americans dealing with kind of sticker shock, if you will, in terms of the prices they're paying. How do you still address the affordability issue while still pursuing that kind of geopolitical outcome?
So we're talking about the things that passed in the big, beautiful bill. You know, obviously, and in New York, SALT. I mean, that's huge for the people.
Trump was with Lawler.
It's exactly why. And that affected California, New York, and New Jersey the most. And then you've got, you know, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. I mean, there are things that we have done to address this. The problem is they're getting kind of lost in all of the other things that people are talking about. Yeah. So we're going to start, as a group, we're going to start really focusing on, hey, this is what we've passed. Obviously, we're doing some cost of living with the homes. Mike Flood, who you mentioned earlier, is kind of leading that. So we're there. We are talking about these issues. We're trying to get good legislation passed to address them.
Can I ask both of you, we only have a minute left, is there going to be a gas tax holiday? Are we suspending the federal gas tax, or we moved on?
The members of Main Street support a tax holiday, but I don't think we're going to get it.
Isn't that something? Jeanne, are we missing an opportunity here? Don't D's and R's want to enjoy the benefits, even if it doesn't bring prices down, of saying, hey, we did something for you?
Yeah, I think there's some support for that. But let's just go back and say what Republicans passed. Yes, they passed no tax on tips, but people are paying that money in the price of gas, the price of groceries. So people are not seeing the benefits of that. And that is the problem. And this war, people feel like, has not done what the president has said, bring peace to the Middle East yet.
$4.39 a gallon, the average today, Kailey, according to AAA, and we still don't have a deal yet. Big thanks to our panel, Jeanne, Zaino, and Sarah Chamberlain, two great minds when it comes to politics. Thank you both for the insights. We'll turn to the Pentagon coming up next here on Bloomberg.
Yeah, it's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Another day of records. Right now, the S&P stands at 75.81, up 17. That is a gain of just about 0.2%. Peace deal hopes sending stocks higher. The VIX lower. Oil also declining. Dow Industrials up 332, up 0.7%. S&P, as I mentioned, up 0.2%. Perhaps most importantly, on track for a 9th straight week of gains on the S&P. NASDAQ also higher, up 52, now up 0.2%. The VIX just above 15, a 10-year at 4.43%, the 2-year 3.99%, and the 30-year below 5%, 4.97%. Gold up 1.4% now to $45.58 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude $86.75 a barrel, down 2.5%. Brent, $91.90 barrel of Brent, down by 1.9%. Replimune Group is soaring 85% after the biotech company said regulators will reconsider its skin cancer treatment after 2 prior rejections. New Jersey Transit says rail service has resumed into and out of Penn Station, New York, and is subject to delays of up to 60 minutes. Cancellations are expected. All of this after a fire broke out on an Amtrak work train. Recapping, S&P up 16, up by 0.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.5%, $86.75 a barrel. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a check on the markets for us. Thank you so much. Meantime, here in Washington, if you've been with us on Balance of Power for a bit, you just heard our conversation with our political panel about some of the issues that Congress is going to be dealing with when they return from recess next week. Yes, there's the question about the budget reconciliation bill Republicans are trying to get across on partisan lines that's being derailed by the anti-weaponization fund of the Trump administrations. There's also questions around a war powers resolution, but they also are going to have to deal in relatively short order with questions around appropriations because, of course, the fiscal year is over on September 30th. There's an August recess and a campaign season that they have to take into account. And we know the Pentagon wants a lot of money. More money, in fact, 50% more than the $1 trillion budget they already have. $1.5 trillion is the defense budget that has been requested by President Trump, and that's even in addition to a potential supplemental request that could be put forward to Congress because of the costs related to the conflict in Iran. So that's a really big price tag. It's actually something we got into on this program yesterday with Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin. And this is what he told us about this proposition.
And the president wants $1.5 trillion for essentially defense contractors. This isn't really money that's going to the military. A small part of it is, but most of this is going to defense contractors. We need to get a better grasp on how much we're spending on defense, period. I don't think they have a game plan of what they're doing, and I think everyone is actually seeing that happen in real time.
Well, let's break this open a little bit, because starting next week, we're going to be hearing a lot more about it with lawmakers back in town, the markup of these bills and the debate that will follow. As Kailey mentioned, we're talking about $1.5 trillion. Most of that would come through a piece of legislation, and the rest a separate piece. Wayne Sanders is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Defense Research Analyst, retired Army colonel, and with us now ahead of our conversation with Zach Shore, who runs a defense contractor called Hermeus, and they're going to be an important part of this conversation at the Pentagon. Let's start with the colonel right now. As you understand it, Wayne, $1.5 trillion will buy us what in terms of ongoing operations versus replenishment?
I would say it's really looking at both, right? For a very long time, we've always had a large amount of stockpiles that have prepared us for future, near peer engagements. And so when we think about a potential adversarial consideration for 2027 against China or others, you have to really start looking at that from that stockpile perspective and go, hey, we have what we need. Now, over the last few years, obviously, with the Ukraine conflict with Russia, as well as Iran, and then a focus on the Indo-Pacific, you really have to start looking at that and saying, here is what we've used up specifically, especially when you start looking at some of these exquisite munitions. But you also have to keep up with the technological advancements based off of it's always going to be a security game. As China gets better at defenses, we have to get better at offense. As we get better at our defenses, an adversary has to be able to get better on their offense. So it continues to be a game. And right now, things continue to get more expensive, and the scalability becomes an issue.
Well, on that scalability, it's also a question of speed. Right, Wayne? I mean, just in the last few months, we've been expending munitions far faster than we can replenish them. How do you accelerate that cycle?
No, they have. They've actually done a very good job. The Trump administration, as well as the end of the Biden administration's really identified and said the defense contractors need to be able to step up their game, and they need to be able to provide additional scalability for their manufacturers. So look at Lockheed. Lockheed for the PAC-3 interceptors, which is the main interceptor for the Patriot system, which has been so successful all over the world. They produce about 650 interceptors a year. And so part of it is that the government has to produce a demand signal that is enough to allow these companies to be able to invest in their own programs. You're seeing a lot of that come out of Congress now. You're seeing a lot of it come from the administration in these framework agreements. And so the demand signal is actually pushing out enough so that they go, okay, I know that I'm going to have 5 to 7 years worth of demand so that I will actually do IRAD. I will actually bring some of these things in. And Lockheed's example, I'm going to stick with that one, $9.8 billion specifically to grow their capacity to 2,000 interceptors over the next 7 years. Now, when you start looking at that, that's 14,000 interceptors. That's about $56 to $60 billion of sales over time. Why is that important? Obviously, is if they only need to invest $6 billion into that into their infrastructure to be able to gain an additional $50 to $60 billion in sales, the math is going to add up. And in the past, there hasn't been enough of that demand forward out for them to do this. And now you're actually seeing that both with Congress and with the Trump administration.
All right, Colonel, thank you so much. As always, Colonel Wayne Sanders, Senior Defense Analyst for us at Bloomberg Intelligence. Thank you so much. And as we consider where all of this defense spending is going and the technologies that it's going to, yes, we talk often about the big government and defense contractors, but there are new entrants in the market as well, worthy of conversation. I'm pleased to say joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is one of them. The president of Hermeus, Zach Shore, is with us on set here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Hermeus is a high-speed aircraft manufacturer, including hypersonic aircraft. And you're joining us, Zach, just a few days after your quarter horse model successfully completed its first supersonic flight. This is the first time a privately developed unmanned supersonic jet has had that kind of success. What can you do with it? What would it enable the U.S. military to do that we don't currently have the capacity for?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. There's a lot of missions that a vehicle like this can unlock. We've certainly heard the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and other leaders testify on the use of F-15s and MQ-9s in the Epic Fury operation. So having an unmanned aircraft that can carry significant payloads, long distances, at high speeds starts to get you into the munitions conversation that you were just having a moment ago. As an example, an aircraft like ours, if it's hitting speeds up to Mach 3, which is what this aircraft will ultimately do, at those speeds, at high altitude, you can effectively double the range of any munition that's on the aircraft's wings. And so what you start to get is the ability to stand off your systems. And this is really important because the further your standoff, the less likely you are to attrit that system and the more survivable you are. We certainly saw with Epic Fury, again, some of the system trades that we had to make in losing aircraft that were within that sort of exchange window. So a vehicle like this gives us that long arm and that low cost.
Our audience should know that you're a warrior, you're a Marine, you served in Iraq and Afghanistan. You also used to work at Andrew, which I find really interesting. And I'm wondering how you view the landscape here. We had an executive from Lockheed talk to us about expanding the capacity of missile manufacturing a couple of days ago. But a lot of folks think that you are the future. Are the old line defense contractors like Lockheed and Raytheon your competitors, or are you in your own space?
It's both and. I mean, there's enough room for everybody here, and there's a lot of expertise in the primes that Hermeus doesn't have. We have a great relationship, as an example, with Pratt & Whitney, given that Raytheon's an investor. We work closely with Northrop Grumman and others.
And you're using a GE engine in this aircraft.
We're using a Pratt & Whitney engine.
Got it. Okay.
Pratt & Whitney engine. So there's a lot of different expertise in this ecosystem, and it's only going to work and scale if we all kind of work together. And the real key is creating enough operating space, economically in particular, to allow companies like Anduril, Hermeus, Castilian to enter that space and to provide new solutions. And so I think, again, as your previous guest spoke, you're seeing this administration and Congress give you some breathing room here to see new entrants. And certainly, Anduril, I was very proud of my time there, have great relationships there, was one of the sort of flag bearers of this new approach to defense tech.
Well, and so on this idea of trying to expand the competition, basically, and widen the pool, is there more you would like to see the Pentagon do to facilitate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not a very original thought. My old boss at Anduril, Chris Brose, talks about this a lot, which is it comes down to contracts. We also just talked about the example of Lockheed spending $6 billion because they now have certainty about $60 billion. The math is simple. The challenge has always been that the defense ecosystem is a monopsony. It is not a sort of a traditional market where supply and demand kind of come together in a natural way. And so, I think one of the things this administration has done very well is with DepSec Feinberg and his team understanding what long lead commitment looks like and giving that certainty. If Hermeus gets a large contract, our ability to create private capital to continue to develop and build upfront and alongside the government is of no question. It ends up in this really unfortunate chicken egg problem that we're starting to see crack. So I think, I would continue to encourage the department to invest in new entrants. I would push them to say, look a little bit more closely at hardware participants. We've seen them do incredible work on the AI side. But I do think sometimes we get a little caught up in the hardware side and giving the incumbents sort of all the opportunity there.
Well, let's talk about your hardware for a moment. The quarter horse, is it remotely piloted? Is it piloted by AI? What's the payload? Can it dogfight?
Yeah, great questions. All the above, right? So to start, we take a very iterative approach. I think Kelly Johnson, Skunkworks, Elon is certainly kind of the king of iteration these days for good reason. So the first version was remotely piloted. However, the vehicle is designed, and we're getting into the basic autonomy of the aircraft. It should not be flown by a human being. We're beyond that. Now, for testing purposes and getting into flight quickly and understanding the aircraft, we started with the vehicle itself. Now we're starting to layer in the autonomy. I will say, from a mission autonomy standard, we don't build the mission autonomy. Companies like Anduril, Northrop, Shield, they all have mission autonomy packages. We are not interested in that part of the market. We are agnostic to that, and we will adopt sort of whatever the customer wants, but we have the basic autonomy on the aircraft. From a payload perspective, our new DIU contract gets us into now releasing weapons, integrating other payloads. I can't really speak in detail about it, you can probably imagine, to take this aircraft and start adding value to the warfighting community in a real way. Because it started as a test asset, and now you're like, well, hold on a second. What if we put insert payload on board? How does this start scaling? So that DIU contract allows us to do it. The dogfighting question is interesting. I mean, a CCA gets to that, but dogfighting is really not the remit of this. You have long ranges and sensors, and so we just want to be a truck that can bring systems to the fight.
I see.
Well, so when we consider all of the different components that will go into this effort, are there supply chain challenges that you are agreeing with? I mean, we talk about the defense industrial base in this country that obviously is in need of a great deal. Where are you seeing it most acutely?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are components certainly that we struggle with that I don't want to necessarily flag on television, but I think one of the things we've done that's been useful is in our design processes, we have fitted our aircraft to integrate into like the F-16 chain as much as possible. It's F-16 landing gear, it's the F-16 engine with Pratt & Whitney's F-100. And so making a vehicle that fits into current supply chains, standard jet fuel, is adoptable and deployable by the current joint force. The other thing is standard steel. It's the 304L steel that Elon uses, laser welding, things like that, to make this as manufacturable as a Sherman tank. That is a key sort of part of way in which we design and prototype these systems.
I want to ask you to weigh in on the concept of autonomous beyond what you just said. There should be no man or woman in the cockpit of an airplane that's being shot at, I think is your point. I had the thrill and the honor to fly in an Air Force F-16 once, and the pilot who brought me over the test firing range in Nevada said, it'll never happen, because what a human being brings to combat is the hair standing up on the back of your neck. That instant reaction, fear as a motivator, could never be duplicated by a computer. This was before the big AI wave began that we're in now. Has that simply changed?
I mean, look, there's feelings around this, as you can imagine.
Well, yeah, what are your feelings?
My feelings is anytime we have certainty, we should be uncertain. The idea of a declaration like that should immediately give you pause. I don't think you have to look much further than the trenches of Ukraine to say the hairs on the back of your neck have now in Ukraine been replaced with autonomous systems that are eating the Russians alive. And so it's all true until it's not true. And so I would challenge the assumption. I don't think it's a binary in an immediate sense, but over time, there's no reason why we can't at least continue to put more distance between a human being and that end system. I can virtually put somebody in the cockpit for certain. And ultimately, I want to be able to trick those systems without being able to trick human beings. And so these are some of the decisions we're going to have to make as a nation.
This has been a fascinating conversation. How much time do you spend at the plant versus at the Pentagon talking to
I mean, I've somehow figured out how to create 48 hours in a day, so I'm everywhere all the time. Can you let me in
on that trick?
No doubt. But after the show, we'll get your insights on that. Zach Shore, it's great to meet you, and thank you
so much
for coming in. The company is called Hermeus. He's the president, a Marine who is now putting his experience to bear in the private sector. Pretty fascinating as we go from Lockheed to Hermeus and a long distance in between.
Yeah, and a conversation we will continue to have, especially as we face down where $1.5 trillion of defense appropriations
that money's going somewhere.
Be spent, assuming, of course, that it can pass. It's an open question we have, just as we still have the open question at this hour as to what determination President Trump will be making when it comes to a potential deal with Iran. We know he was in the Situation Room. We don't know what's coming out of it.
We could have some news when we meet back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay with us. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu on Bloomberg.